The notification came at 2047 in the afternoon. My last meeting of the day had been cancelled. I should have gone to the coffee shop on Fifth, ordered the lavender latte I'd been craving since Monday, and spent an hour doing absolutely nothing. That was the sensible thing. That was what the old version of me would have done. Instead, I drove home. I don't know what pulled me back. A feeling, maybe. The kind that sits low in your stomach and doesn't announce itself as anything important until later, until you're standing in the middle of your own kitchen trying to remember how to breathe. I'd had that feeling for weeks, actually. I just kept deciding it was anxiety, kept deciding it was work stress, or the fact that we hadn't really actually talked, in almost 2 months. Kept deciding I was reading into things that weren't there. Our street was quiet that afternoon. The neighbor's retriever was asleep on the porch. The oak tree at the end of the driveway had finally started to turn. It looked like any other Tuesday in October, except for one thing. My husband's car was in the driveway, and parked directly behind it, close enough that you couldn't pull out without moving the other, was a white Audi I recognized immediately. I sat in my car for 30 seconds. My best friend Danielle drove a white Audi. I told myself there was an explanation. There's always an explanation if you want one badly enough. Maybe she'd stop by to drop something off. Maybe Cole was sick and she'd come to check on him. Maybe I was about to walk into something completely ordinary that I would feel embarrassed about later. I climbed out of my car. I walked to the front door. I put my key in the lock so slowly, so carefully, that it made no sound at all. The house felt different the moment I stepped inside. Not loud, not chaotic. Worse than that, it felt like a house that had been holding its breath. I stood in the entryway for a moment, listening. I heard music from upstairs. Cole always played music from his phone when he worked from home, but this was different. Lower, softer. The kind of thing you put on when you want the world outside to disappear. I pulled out my phone. I don't remember making the decision. I just remember my thumb pressing record, and then I was walking up the stairs. The bedroom door was not fully closed. I won't tell you everything I saw. I will tell you this. It was not ambiguous. It was not something I could rationalize or explain away or fold up into something smaller and more manageable. It was exactly what it looked like. My husband, my best friend, the bed I bought with my own money, in the apartment I decorated with my own hands, in the life I had built from scratch after moving to the city with nothing but 2 suitcases and an absolute refusal to fail. I stood in that doorway for 4 seconds. I counted them because I needed something to hold on to. Then I walked back downstairs. I sat on the bottom step. And I pressed stop on my phone. There are moments in your life where everything that comes before it becomes a different story. You don't know it when it's happening. You think you're just living, just accumulating days, just making normal choices that mostly work out. Then something like this happens, and you look back and realize you were already in the story. You just didn't know what kind. Cole and I had been married for 3 years. We met when I was 27, at a gallery opening downtown that neither of us had particularly wanted to attend. I was a graphic designer at a mid-sized agency. He was working in commercial real estate. We were good together, or at least I thought we were. He was charming in a way that felt effortless, the kind of man who walks into a room and adjusts its gravity slightly. I mistook that for depth for a long time. I think a lot of people do. Danielle had been my best friend since college. We'd lived together our senior year, driven cross-country together after graduation, stood in each other's corner through every ugly breakup and career pivot and 3 a.m. crisis. I had been her maid of honor at her first wedding. I had held her hand when that marriage fell apart. I had, at some point in the past 3 years, introduced her to my husband approximately 100 times. I sat on that step for a long time. By the time I heard movement upstairs, I was already gone. I drove to a parking garage 2 miles away and sat in the dark on the 3rd level until I could think clearly. The video on my phone was 47 seconds long, clear audio, clear visuals, timestamp embedded automatically. I watched it once, which was once more than I needed to, and then I locked my phone and stared at the concrete wall in front of me and made a list in my head. What I had: evidence, time, the element of surprise, What I needed, a plan that didn't involve me driving back to that house and doing something I could not undo. I am not, by nature, an impulsive person. I build things slowly and carefully. I pay attention to structure. I know what it means to measure twice and cut once, and I know that the most expensive mistakes you make in life are the ones made in the first hour of a crisis. So I sat in that parking garage and I did not cry, not yet, and I built the plan piece by piece. First, I would not let Cole know that I knew. Second, I would secure what was mine before I showed a single card. Third, I needed a lawyer. Not a friend. Not a recommendation from a mutual contact who might feel obligated to mention it to Cole over golf. A clean, blind recommendation from someone with no connection to either of us. I went home that night like nothing had happened. Cole made dinner. He cooked when he felt guilty, which I'd always found endearing and now found sickening. We sat across from each other and I ate the pasta and answered his questions about my day and watched his face very carefully and thought, "You have no idea what is coming." The hardest part was not letting him see it in my eyes. The second hardest part was not calling Danielle. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved quietly. I photographed every financial document I could access, bank statements, investment accounts, the mortgage, the joint savings account that Cole managed, and I had, in an act of trust I now found almost comical, never paid close attention to. I photographed the insurance policies. I made copies of his business records from the filing cabinet in his office, which he had never bothered to lock because he had never imagined I would have a reason to look. I stored everything in a folder on a cloud account he didn't know existed, on a phone number registered to an email he'd never seen. I kept watching him across the dinner table. I kept answering his texts. I kept being a wife, which is a performance I now understand is easier when you have stopped caring whether the audience believes it. On a Thursday morning when Cole was at a showing across town, I drove to a law firm I'd found through a review site. Not locally, but 40 minutes outside the city, in a suburb neither of us had any connection to. I'd chosen it because of one attorney's profile, 12 years of family law, a specialty in high-asset divorce, a reputation for being, in the words of one reviewer, quietly relentless. The office was on the second floor of a converted Victorian near the town square. The receptionist offered me coffee. I took it without tasting it. I sat in the waiting room and looked at the framed photographs on the wall, generic landscapes, a coast I didn't recognize, and tried to prepare what I was going to say. The door opened. "Mrs. Hadley, I'm ready for you." She was maybe 40, with dark hair pulled back and the kind of posture that told you she was used to being the most composed person in the room. She extended her hand. I shook it and looked at her face and felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. I knew this face. Not well, not recently, but I had seen it before in a photograph on Cole's phone, one of those scrolling family album things he'd shown me once during the holidays. A sister he'd grown up with, moved away from home, barely talked to anymore. I had thought she was an attorney. I had thought her name was, "I'm Catherine Hadley Ross," she said. "It's nice to meet you." I stood very still. His last name. Her married name. That's why it hadn't triggered anything when I searched the firm. She'd changed her name when she married, and I had found her completely by accident, 40 minutes from a city where neither of them lived anymore, in a suburb with no connection to either of their lives. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. I sat down. I don't know exactly how long I didn't speak. It must have been obvious that something had shifted because she tilted her head slightly and said, "Are you all right?" "I think," I said slowly, "that you might be my husband's sister." The room went very quiet. She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not surprise, exactly, but a kind of careful recalibration, the way a person looks when they're deciding very quickly who they are going to be in the next few minutes. "Cole Hadley," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." She set down her pen. She folded her hands on the desk, and then she said something I have replayed many times since. "I haven't spoken to my brother in 4 years. We don't have a relationship. But I understand completely if you need to find another attorney. I looked at her. I thought about the drive here. The 40 minutes of flat highway and brown autumn fields and the particular kind of desperation that makes you drive past every familiar landmark until the landscape doesn't recognize you anymore. I thought about the parking garage, the pasta, the 47-second video still sitting on my phone. What I need, I said, is someone who is very good at their job. She held my gaze for 3 seconds. Then she picked up her pen. Tell me everything. I did. I told her about the discovery, the video, the 2 weeks of documentation, the financial accounts I'd photographed, the business records I'd copied. I told her about the joint savings account and the fact that I had contributed to it every month for 3 years from my own income. I told her about the house, technically in both our names, purchased with a down payment that had come largely from my inheritance. I told her about Danielle, whose role in all of this I was still not sure how to classify, betrayer, accomplice, or simply proof that the people you trust most are capable of anything. Catherine Hadley Ross took notes without flinching. She asked precise, unemotional questions. She had the demeanor of someone who had heard every version of this story before and still found the work of it worth doing carefully. At one point I said, "Does it bother you that it's him?" And she paused her writing and said, "What bothers me is when someone gets away with something they shouldn't." She said it simply, without drama, and went back to her notes. She told me to do nothing yet. Don't move money. Don't change passwords. Don't send any messages to Danielle. Don't give Cole any indication that the dynamic has shifted. She needed 10 days to build the filing properly, to account for every asset, every discrepancy, every document I gathered, so that when the papers were served, there was no room to maneuver. People make the mistake of moving too fast, she said as I was leaving. They act on emotion and they hand the other side time to prepare. You've already done the hard part. You've been patient. Don't stop now. I drove home. I made dinner. I watched Cole eat and talk about a property he was excited about and told him that sounded great. Those 10 days were the longest of my life. On the 8th day, something happened that I hadn't anticipated. Danielle texted me, not an unusual message, just a checking in, "How are you?" text, the kind she'd sent 100 times. I stared at it for a long time. I thought about 3 years of Friday nights and shared bottles of wine and the way she'd held me when my father died 2 winters ago. I thought about the white Audi in my driveway and the music playing softly upstairs, and the 4 seconds I had stood in that doorway counting. I typed back, "Good. Busy with work. Let's catch up soon." I pressed send and put my phone face down on the counter. On the 10th day, Catherine called. "We're ready," she said. "I'd like you to be somewhere other than the house when we serve the papers. Is there somewhere you can be on Friday afternoon?" I told her I'd be at the office. She said that was fine. She said there was one other thing she wanted to tell me before we moved forward. Something she had found in the process of reviewing the financial records I'd provided. "There's a second account," she said. "In your husband's name only. It was opened 18 months ago. Over the course of the past year and a half, approximately $63,000 has been moved into it from your joint savings in increments small enough to avoid automatic flagging." I sat down. "He's been draining it," I said. "Consistently, yes, which changes the nature of your claim significantly." She paused. "I want you to understand what this means in terms of asset division. The court takes financial misconduct seriously." I thought about all the months I hadn't looked closely at the joint account, all the months I had trusted him to manage it because that was what we had agreed to, because it was efficient, because I was busy and I believed in the architecture of our partnership. I thought about what trust actually is and whether it is something you give or something you build and whether, in the end, the distinction even matters. "Thank you for finding that," I said. "That's what I'm here for." Friday came. I went to the office. I sat at my desk. I opened a project file and stared at it without seeing anything. At 2:15, my phone buzzed, a message from Catherine. It said only, "Done." At 2:43, Cole called me. I let it ring. At 2051, he called again. I watched my phone vibrate on my desk like something trying to get out of a box. A colleague 2 desks over glanced up. I turned it face down. He left a voicemail. I listened to it that evening, sitting in my car in the office parking structure. Different garage, different city, same posture. His voice was not what I expected. It was not loud. He didn't sound angry, at least not yet. He sounded confused, the way someone sounds when the floor has moved without warning and they haven't yet identified what has shifted beneath them. Megan, call me. Please. I need to talk to you. Whatever this is, we can talk about it. I pressed delete. What followed over the next 6 weeks was something Catherine had prepared me for. But that still required everything I had. Cole hired an attorney. He contested the financial misconduct claim. He denied the hidden account had anything to do with their marriage, claimed it was a private business account, that the deposits had been mischaracterized. His attorney sent letters. Catherine replied to every one of them with something that made the previous letter look very small. Danielle called me twice. I didn't answer either time. She sent a text that read, "I know you know. I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know that I'm sorry." I read it 3 times and didn't reply because there was nothing in me that felt like responding, and I had stopped doing things just because I thought I was supposed to. The deposition happened on a Tuesday in November. Cole walked in and saw Catherine at the table and stopped in the doorway for just a second, just long enough for me to see it land. He recovered quickly. He was always good at recovering quickly. But I saw it. I saw the moment he understood that his own sister was sitting across from him in a conference room on behalf of the wife he had spent 3 years deceiving, and that she had arrived there not because I had found her on purpose, but because the world, sometimes, has its own sense of order. Later, Catherine told me he had tried to speak to her privately before the session began. She had declined. She had told him she was there in her professional capacity and that any communication needed to go through the proper channels. I asked her how that had felt. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I spent a long time feeling like I owed my brother something just because we came from the same place. Like loyalty to family meant loyalty to behavior, and that you didn't get to have standards for the people you were related to." She looked at me steadily. "I don't believe that anymore. Some things are just wrong, regardless of who does them." I thought about that for a long time afterward. The settlement came through in February. The house went to me, its value established by independent appraisal, with Cole required to sign over his equity as part of the financial misconduct adjudication. The hidden account was factored into the division of assets, along with 3 years of undisclosed transfers. Cole's attorney tried 3 separate times to have the video evidence suppressed. He failed all 3 times. My state is a one-party consent state. I had not needed his permission to record what I recorded. On the morning the final papers were filed, I sat in my car outside the courthouse and let myself cry for the first time. Not because I was sad. Exactly. Or not only because of that. It was the release of something I had been holding very tightly for a very long time, and when I finally put it down, I didn't know what to do with my hands. I called my mother. I told her it was over. She said, "Good, come home for a week." I said I would. I listed the house that March. A young couple bought it, early 30s, just moved to the city, their first home together. The realtor told me they were excited. I thought about them standing in the kitchen I had renovated, sleeping in the room with the oak floors I had refinished myself, sitting on the back porch where I had spent so many evenings believing I was building something that would hold. I hoped the house would be good to them. I hoped they would be honest with each other. I moved into an apartment with high ceilings and south-facing windows and an extra bedroom I turned into a studio. I bought a drafting table I'd wanted for years and kept putting off. I started running in the mornings again, something I'd stopped doing at some point in the marriage without noticing. A few things I want to say. For anyone who is somewhere in the middle of what I went through, the hardest part is not the discovery. The discovery is terrible, but it's clean. It's one moment, one shift, one before and one after. The hardest part is the silence that comes after it, the days you spend moving through your own life like nothing has changed, being careful and patient and quiet while everything inside you is screaming. That silence requires something from you that no one warns you about. It requires you to trust yourself more than you've ever had to before. I trusted myself. I also want to say something about Catherine. When everything was finalized, I sent her a note. Not a review, not a formal letter, just a card, the kind with a simple design that doesn't try to say too much. I told her that I was grateful for her skill, but that what I was most grateful for was the choice she had made in that first meeting, to pick up the pen and take the notes and decide who she was going to be. That she didn't have to do that, that she could have very easily cited conflict of interest and shown me the door, and that no one would have blamed her. She wrote back. It was short. It said, "You deserved someone in your corner. I'm glad I was there." That's the thing about betrayal. And I don't mean just what Cole did or what Danielle did. I mean the broader architecture of it. The way it makes you question your own vision, your own memory, your own sense of what is real. The way it can make you feel in those early days that the entire structure of your life was built on a foundation that was always hollow. The thing that gets you through it, the only thing, in my experience, is finding out who stands with you when standing with you costs them something. Some people surprise you. I was talking to a colleague last month, a woman a few years younger than me, going through something similar, and she said, "How did you stay so calm? How did you not just fall apart?" I thought about the parking garage, the pasta, the 47 seconds, the 10 days of silence. I thought about sitting across from Catherine for the first time, saying, "I think you might be my husband's sister," and the particular quality of the silence that followed. I wasn't calm, I told her. I was just slower than my panic. That's the whole secret, I think. You don't have to outrun it. You just have to be slightly ahead of it. One step, one decision, one morning at a time, until one morning you wake up in an apartment with south-facing windows and a drafting table you always wanted, and the sun is coming in at exactly the right angle. And the loaf on the other side of all that silence turns out to be the one you were supposed to be building all along. I put the kettle on. I sit at the drafting table. I start.